Let's look at some of these stories in a bit more detail. Jonathan Gibson is a political commentator who joins me on the line. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning.
Shall we start with this question mark over the retirement age that the Times is leading on? When might we all retire, and why does it depend on what job you have?
Yes, so this is a real conundrum at the moment that the government are facing right now. Because we've got an aging population with people living longer, there's also an increasing burden on the government to, support pension costs. So it's gone from being about 15% of our GDP to 25%. So we're really seeing sort of the spiraling costs of the growing age in our population. And so obviously this is there have been calls for pension ages to be raised to 68, which have been met with a lot of resistance. And Mel Stride, the pension secretary, saying she's delayed it. And there's been talk of how it's going to potentially affect poorer people versus wealthier people, and talks about differences in terms of how physically demanding work whether it should be treated differently or not.
So do you think it should be?
I think they should, because if you think about people that go straight in from school, they don't go to university, generally the work is going to be much more back-breaking, so it'll be much harder to keep going at sort of 67, 68. I think it's almost impossible. I think it's a ridiculous ask in some ways, and, it'll put more burden on the NHS, who will have to deal with greater numbers of injuries. I don't think many 68-year-olds can necessarily do construction work if they can.
I don't know. I know quite a few lively people in their late 60s.
Well, it's very impressive they can, for sure. But I think to expect every 68-year-old to, be doing the same physical work that, 23-year-old builders are doing is slightly unfair. If they can, for sure, go for it. But it's quite challenging.
So Mel Stride has sort of delayed the decision on raising the state pension age. So that's until after the election. So who will be quite making the decision? It's not clear. Look at what's happened in France when you tried to raise the pension age. I don't think it would go down quite as terribly here as it has done in France, but it is an extremely difficult political decision to action, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if you think about it, the millennial life expectancy has gone down by 3 years. 68, 60 is not particularly young to be retiring. It used to be significantly younger. And so, yes, obviously it might not be France, in which they're rioting on the streets and, fights with police, but it's still not going to go down well. It's not going to be a popular measure, and it's something that's going to need to be looked at as, we start living longer.
A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about conduct of the police, particularly at the Met. And what's made headlines this morning is the conduct of people working within the fire service. Staff at a quarter of fire and rescue services in England have been reported to have had alleged racist, homophobic and misogynistic behaviour. How do you feel reading this story? It's yet another organisation of people who've signed up to have jobs to protect us. And when we look at the conduct of people in those offices, often a lot of the behaviour is pretty rotten.
To be honest, I feel both concerned, really disappointed and upset by it. And, inspectors are saying this could even just be the tip of the iceberg. This isn't everything that's been uncovered. Clearly, there's been, a lot more reports and a lot more reporting on the police service. But to see this not just being across the police, but also now being across the fire service is just really, really upsetting. There were some really distressing reports of things that have been said, things that have been done by individuals, complaints of racism, misogyny, bullying. And I think we really need to take a look at sort of the values and the culture of our really important institutions, because it's fundamental to our society. So we cannot allow these, really, really negative and horrible values to be permeating across. We need to think about how we can reevaluate that and properly investigate to ensure that this behaviour does not continue.
Yeah, and loads of those questions are going to be asked today, particularly in light of that report. The questions we were asking yesterday was what was happening in our schools, particularly secondary schools, when pupils, children, teenagers were raising concerns. They're saying they had distress over what gender they thought they were. And what this think tank found was that many schools were allowing children to change their gender and then not talk to the parents about it. Well, the latest development in the Times this morning is saying that head teachers say schools have spent years calling in vain for government guidance on gender matters so they can help trans pupils and those questioning their identity. Where do you think the failure has been here, Jonathan, in terms of doing whatever is best for those pupils?
The failure has been that there's been absolutely no guidance. There's been no consistency whatsoever. Teachers are essentially, in many schools, taking matters into their own hands based on their own personal beliefs. There isn't the necessary, support and guidance and advice to ensure that every single pupil can be well supported and have their interests represented. And so I think it's really, more than time to get schools to have some guidance and have some support in terms of how to deal with these issues, which, let's be honest, there's lots of debate around. They're quite emotional issues, they're quite contentious issues, and so the sort of the absence of government and grant chapters just simply saying, we just need to focus on maths and nothing else. I agree, that's certainly the first priority of schools, but you can't simply ignore the issue, because then you're going to get schools acting without sort of expert guidance, without the necessary support, as a think tank has found. There needs to be some sort of guidance and regulation based on, the expert advice and promoting children's best interests and allowing them to sort of flourish in school and really focus on their academics.
Yeah, the Department of Education is thought to be working with Kemi Badenoch, the Minister for Women and Equalities, to try and draw up some new guidance. Obviously, part of the problem is just the number of education secretaries there have been in the last few years. There's not really been any consistency at all.
No, there hasn't. There absolutely hasn't. And, it is a difficult role. And this issue itself is, a very heated issue. And so I can see why the government as well have wanted to sort of avoid it slightly if they could, because it sets off a whole lot of debates and a lot of pressure from lots of different angles and lots of different sides. So I think there's a few reasons aside from, constantly changing. I mean, the last 12 months of Tory government, you've essentially been replaced by completely different figures several times.
And part of the delay, they're saying, is that they're writing whole new legislation and guidance. It's not like they're adapting something that already exists. Gwyneth Paltrow is on the front page of the Times. I don't know how closely you followed this extraordinary case over the last week. I think for many people, they think, well, thank goodness we don't have this level of, cameras in courts here in the UK.
No, yes, the US justice system is something to behold, not necessarily in a good way. It's been quite an unbelievable case. I think people really have sort of that appetite for, the eat the rich kind of cases. I guess this was definitely lower stakes than the Johnny Depp Amber Heard sort of case, but still, piqued people's interest. People have been hungry, I think since the Agatha Christie case, for, another celebrity case. So it's been interesting, following that.
How do you think she held herself?
Sorry?
How do you think she sort of held herself and presented herself?
So if I'm honest, I haven't been watching every detail, but I saw the clip of when the verdicts was read. She looked quite relieved. I think, it's been interesting seeing insights into the rich and powerful, their lives and the way they conduct themselves. And, clearly the jury were persuaded in under 2 hours. And I think it's, interesting to get this insight, but again, this invasion of privacy and, broadcasting to the whole world seems pretty tough. So I think you have to have quite hard skin in order to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Now, finally, Jonathan, I wouldn't really be having a fry up normally on a Friday. If you were, would a hash brown feature on your plate?
So I'll be honest, I think you're probably asking the wrong person, given that I come from actually a religious Jewish household, so I can't eat bacon, unfortunately, or black pudding. So there seems to be sort of a populist divide, though, from what I read, in that, 60% of the British public do believe that it's sort of the most important part of an English breakfast, whereas the sort of the elites, the English breakfast society, say no, it's absolutely not popularised by McDonald's, and rather, we need to take back our roots and ensure that we, do not condone or allow, these sorts of areas to manifest into our English breakfast.
Yeah, there's going to be a campaign, #Bring Back the Bubble, saying that bubble and squeak should be in place of the humble hash brown. Jonathan Gibson, thank you very much for talking to me. Political commentator with Young Voices UK, to go through some of the stories in the paper.